Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished professional from Bangalore, India, Tina Vinod. Tina, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tina is a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist and consultant. She's the founder of Diversity Simplified, an organization with a vision to help workplaces and communities overcome barriers to adopt and operationalize high-impact diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, practices, programs, and communications. Tina also continues to consult with ThoughtWorks, a global technology consultancy company, where she was leading the DEI function both globally and in India for many years. So, Tina, given your amazing journey, tell me a little bit about what got you interested in DEI.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh, for having me here. And it's wonderful that I can share my journey and my learnings with everyone who is your audience. If I talk about my journey very, very briefly, I think for many of us, our professional and our personal journeys are in tandem, right? And growing up in India in the 80s and 90s and seeing the huge gender disparity and inequity, the stereotyping and biases that existed right from, our families to our ecosystem, our society, the media, the movies we watched, I think many girls and women of that age would definitely have been affected by what they have seen and experienced. I also think as a country, there is so much of disparity even between the class, the economic, social and economic biases that exist within a country like ours. And I have been a huge, I read a lot. I spend a lot of time exploring new topics and subjects. And I think that has been my journey. I also have my mother was a mental illness patient and was diagnosed with, depression, clinical depression very early on when both me and my sister were around 9 and 10. And being caregivers at that very young age, I think has been a very different experience for us. My father passed away when we were very young. So we were primarily caregivers of our mother. She passed away recently. But that journey itself has been very, very different as to how that role changes and how you look at, enriching your own lives through that entire journey. And it hasn't been easy, but I can't say it's been too tough as well when I see all the other things that exist in this world around us.
It's so amazing. I know my mother had dementia at a much, much later stage in life. And the doctor always said that the most important thing is to look after the caregivers. And you and your sister were caregivers when you were only 8. My goodness. So, Tina, let's talk about DEI. What got you interested in the subject of DEI that you decided to make a career in it?
Yeah. So I've spent the last, I think, 20 years, 20 plus years working in ThoughtWorks, and I recently, I'm consulting with them. I'm no longer an employee, and I've also started Diversity Simplified, which focuses in the DEI space. I think the one thing that when I look at diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that we can bring to our workplaces. That entire journey happened in ThoughtWorks. If you look at ThoughtWorks as an organization, there's been a huge focus on one, bringing technology for good and promoting social and economic justice through technology. But also there is a huge focus around equitable workplaces for all, especially gender equity. So I started that journey early on in ThoughtWorks because I was one part of the seeding team in India to I got the opportunity to work very closely in the social impact function within the organization and was leading the function for many years. And when the opportunity came to take on the role of DEI for India, I think that was something I was so excited about. And that is something I, in fact, proposed to the management saying, and the leadership saying, this is something I want to do, and I really hope I get the opportunity to do it. And that spiraled the whole journey in this space. I do think organizational culture plays a big role in, and the leadership and the purpose and values of the organization plays a big role in sort of creating the roadmap for DEI in an organization. And I think I've had the privilege of being part of this organization. And, and the vision of its founder was also around equitable workplaces and how do we build technology that's also equitable.
Well said.
So that's how I started my journey.
And based on the amazing experience you've had in this area, what would you say are some of the more important, I think more important is the wrong word, but what are some of the inequity challenges faced by women and minorities in our country and the world?
There is so much of inequity. What do we talk about? I was recently part of a conversation by the Aspen Foresight Group, where they had invited a few different people from different, areas of focus.
Correct.
And we had met to talk about two topics. One is the changing demographics, geopolitics, and how the changing population is impacting our world today. And the other was around climate change, technology, AI, ChatGPT. So it was very, very interesting conversations. And we all know that today India is the most populous country in the world.
Correct.
And inequity exists, whether it is gender. Sometimes I feel we live in the cities in our own bubbles, and we think, oh my God, it's so safe. Our girls are able to travel out alone late in the night. There are cabs, it's being tracked, and but inequity exists. There's not access to technology is so there is a huge disparity in access for technology, and across, whether it's socioeconomic conditions, or whether it is access to education or technology, or whether it is access to drinking water. There are huge issues that are there. But in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think, and in the space that I work in, technology can be a great enabler and a game changer if used in the right way. So I do see that happening as well.
Very interesting. And, you worked with ThoughtWorks. My question to you is, what are some of the important things a leader can do to enhance inclusion in their organization?
When you look at inclusion within the organization, I think it's very important to understand how a leader can bring vulnerability and their lived experiences into the workplace. A lot of times, I think there is this whole masculine aspect of leadership. It says a leader has to be tough. A leader has to be strong. A leader should take tough decisions. So you don't really see the softer aspects of what you can bring to the workplace. And so I do think values that a leader carries becomes very, very important. So whether it is, equity within the organization, whether it is issues of equal opportunity, pay parity, whether it is issues of access and equal, good policies and programs, a leader plays a very, very, I think, a very, very important role as an executive sponsor for change. In ThoughtWorks, I have seen how leaders can really be the game changers when it comes to driving equity and inclusion within an organization. And if you see organizations that have exec sponsorship for DEI, you will see that the programs and the way they look at diversity, equity, and inclusion within the workplace and how it intersects with other issues like the markets they tap into, the type of hiring they do, or their CSR or ESG initiatives, you would see that the whole aspect is very different because they look at it with a holistic lens. So it is almost a business priority. It is also a business priority, and it is something that is important for your organization, your people, and your culture. So it is not siloed in a HR focus only.
Well said. Great response. Thank you. So, Tina, I've been speaking to many, many women leaders from around the world. And I've often heard that while a lot of women leaders now have a place in boardrooms, they don't yet have a voice. So there is diversity, but there is not enough inclusion. I'd love to get your perspectives.
It is true that, you see, even when you see an increase of women in the workforce, it's always at the junior, the grad level, and the mid levels, right? You see a lot of women drop out also because they are the primary caregivers. So you would see that pattern. And when we study data within organizations or we look at research trends that are there, we do see a huge dropout of women at the mid-career level, primarily because of caregiving reasons, either for their children, or for caregiving of older people in the house, right? So that's a pattern that you see. So you miss out on a lot of women who can potentially be leaders long term. So that is one pattern. And we have also seen during the COVID, a lot of women quit the workforce, right? And there was also a lot of silent quitting. But one of the things we've also seen as a recent trend is that women care about advancement, care about moving ahead in their careers. And when they do not get that opportunity, you see them quit that organization and move to an organization where they are recognized, they're given better roles, and they're given higher responsibility and a seat at the table. Now, that trend will take years to change, and we know that. But one thing that organizations can do is to look at leadership representation, not just of women, but an intersectionality as well, right? Do you have representation from an underrepresented community? Do you have representation from a person with disability or the LGBTQ plus community as well? So you should look at that lens of inclusion in your leadership team, because data and research says that the more diverse your leadership team is, the more successful your business is. And I don't think it's something that we can ignore. Now, what can organizations do to ensure? I think it is something that is long-term, and it's a huge investment that leaders and organizations need to make, right from, mentorship programs to leadership development programs to support, to ensuring that, there is a lot of role models within the organization so that they get the right support and the vision to make that happen. It's still a long way away, and we know that. And I think organizations who focus on having more diversity at the leadership level, I think will bring about change in the society at large.
But, Tina, one of the other things that I'm wondering is that while there is a lot of awareness of DEI in the corporate world, what is it like in the communities that we live in with the state governments, central governments, in the society?
See, there are quite a few policies today, and I was just talking to two professors this morning, and they were talking about how gender equity is a huge agenda of the government today, right? Especially with the elections coming up. But you would see that opportunity is there only for a small section of our society, the educated, the ones that have opportunity. But there's a huge section of the society that does not have the opportunity. And the primary caregiver role is something that is hugely rampant, especially in smaller cities and in rural India. And that narrative needs to change by how we look at educating our girls. And I think that is the biggest investment that you can do in educating our girls. And yesterday was the National Girl Child Day.
Absolutely.
And I cannot tell you how important education is. And in the context of what organizations can do, organizations have huge CSR and ESG budgets. And if they can invest that in programs and in both governmental and non-profit-led organizations programs to educate the girl child, I think that would be a huge game changer. I think it's also psychological. It is cultural shift that needs to happen. There's a lot that needs to happen, but even moving the maternity leave from 3 months to 6 months has been a huge way of retention of women in the workplace. And I think there is a lot of positive change, but there's a country as large as ours. I think there is a lot more to do.
I agree. But again, based on your experience and all the work that you are doing through Diversity Simplified, where does accountability lie?
Accountability lies with the leadership. But I think if you're a smart leadership team, you would make your entire organization own the DEI agenda. I often say this is not a HR agenda. This is not your leadership agenda. If you care deeply about the space and if you want engagement and you want investment, you make your people own the agenda of DEI. The more you own it and you set the rules, you are only going to get dissent. But if you make it an inclusive process where you get your employees to also participate in the decision making of DEI, there would be huge change. And this is something I've seen in action in ThoughtWorks, and I've seen it also in other organizations. So, to be honest, I think when I started consulting, I've been pleasantly surprised by how much organizations are doing in the DEI space and how much more potential is there.
Correct. And yet, I was speaking to some global leaders on my podcast and I asked them, and they said, oh, we've put policies in place at the board level. Now the CHRO has to go and implement it. So I was a little surprised to hear that kind of a comment.
Policies a lot of times are driven by mandate, right? Like, okay, this is something that needs to be done because it's a mandate by the government, by whoever makes the rules. But organizations can go beyond that. A simple example would be your prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace policy pertains to only women. But you can make it a gender neutral policy and you can say it includes everyone. It's for men. It's for the people from the LGBTQ plus community. But right now, that broadening of scope is in the hands of the organization. Even before the 3-month, when the 3-month maternity leave policy was there, ThoughtWorks had a policy for maternity leave for 6 months. We introduced it almost 2 years before it became a mandate. So there is a lot that organizations can do to bring about shift and changes. And I've seen organizations do that. There are so many organizations that are bringing about shift and changes, including the manufacturing industry. And so that shift will happen, but I'm sorry, it's not a CHRO's agenda.
Right.
It is the leadership agenda.
Absolutely.
And shifts happen also because people demand it. A lot of times policies come in place because there is a requirement, you see there is a need, and then you make that happen, whether it's policies, whether it's a program like a leadership development program, or it can be simple things like starting an employee resource group. Correct. You do need inputs from the people.
Well said. Tina, you also spoke a little bit about technology. How can technology support DEI across multiple, organizations, societies, communities, etc.? And the converse of that question is, will technology make the divide even greater?
There's a lot of conversation happening about ChatGPT, right? And oh my God, is it going to take away our jobs? Already, with the recession and the predicted, cost cuts that are happening, and there is so many challenges that are existing, especially for the younger folks today. And so yes, technology can be a great enabler, like I said before. Right from the healthcare. AI is great when it comes to right from technology to detect cancer cells, right? There is a huge change in how technology can be used for positive social change, whether it's education or whether it is access to even simple solutions. Technology plays a great role, but there is bias, and a lot of times, especially with AI. These inputs come in from people, and people make mistakes. And so it's always good to look at technology as an enabler and not a solution by itself. The disparity that's there in access to technology itself is a big question in countries like India and Africa. And so looking at how we can bridge that gap and ensuring technology is available for all, I think should be one of the biggest areas of focus for countries like India. Well
said. So Tina, I have time for 3 more questions for you. My next question is, in a country as big as ours, which is so culturally diverse, what is the impact, in your opinion, culture has on DEI?
So I often talk about when I talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and bringing and how all of us have our individual identities.
Mm.
I talk about three that are three areas or three lenses that we focus on.
Mm.
And one is the personal lens,
Mm.
which is our lived experiences, where we come from, what are our learnings, what is like, I spoke about how I was a caregiver for my parent who had, depression, clinical depression. And so that lived experience, how it influenced me later on in my life, is
Mm.
something makes me a person, right? But there is also the fact that our culture, Indian lens, especially in the context of India, what are the different things and nuances that happen, right? If I
Mm.
come from a South India versus if I come from a Northeast
Mm.
state, how does that influence me? How confident I am? And I often, one of the examples I talk about is how bias can play a huge role, right,
Mm.
in in impacting opportunities
Mm.
that are available, or some of the challenges and the discrimination people face. I remember one friend telling me about an incident that happened in Delhi,
Mm.
where during the pandemic, some of our northeastern Indians were called, Chinese,
Mm.
and said, "Go back to China. You brought COVID to
Yeah.
India." And
Mm.
so these are things that continue to influence us: religion,
Mm.
caste, social and economic status. I think are big areas and there is intersectionality, right? If I'm a person with disability, I'm a woman, and I belong to the scheduled caste, the discrimination and the disparity I face is going to be very different if I'm a
Mm.
woman from with an educated background and I'm not a person with disability and I'm a cis woman,
Mm.
right? So that itself, so gender cannot be treated with the same lens.
Mm.
And I think in a country like ours, it's very important that government bodies, that our leaders ensure that some of these disparities are not brought forth and
Mm.
constantly spoken about, and widening the gap of some of these disparities, I think is shameful, especially with all the advancement that we as a country have made.
Well said.
Diversity can be a huge advantage to us if we
Mm.
use it in the right way.
Well said. And my last question to you, Tina, is for the many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own journey, all your learnings, everything that you've done in the area of DEI, what would you say are three lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
Okay, so three lessons. I would say, okay, let me think about this a little.
Mm-hmm.
Three lessons would be, a lot of times you're talking about my lessons, right, Ashutosh?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. So I would say a lot of times we talk about what our environment or what our society or what benefits and opportunities we've had based on the surroundings around us and what's being
Mm.
given to us.
Mm.
But I think we often fail to question what are we doing in our individual capacity.
Mm.
And I think that is the primary thing. What am I doing in my
Yeah,
individual capacity? Um, when I was thinking about doing something different in the DI space
yeah.
and not working for an organization,
Mm.
I really, when I started Diversity Simplified, I said, what different are we going to do as an
Mm.
organization that's going to bring a different lens to DEI, not
Mm.
only to our workplaces but to the society at large.
Correct.
And I think that's one big lesson that I have. I Being the youngest country in the world today, and the Gen Zers that are hitting our workplace, and the Alpha Gen who are so influenced by technology and everything else around what technology can offer. I
Mm.
think one big thing would be to look at how we can positively look at bringing in the change, the
Mm.
inclusion, and the mindset of embracing everyone
Mm.
with this generation. If
Mm.
you see this generation, they talk less about about differences. They talk less about
Correct.
religion. They talk less about caste. But what they do talk about is technology. They talk about how we embrace each other. They talk about not being restricted by barriers of either your education or where you come from. So I think there's so much to learn from this generation.
Absolutely.
Today. And I think the third one for me would be um, the shift that's happening with AI and everything that it has to offer. I think when the conversations around ChatGPT is happening, and I was part of this conversation around where do we see ourselves 20 years from now, and I think technology is going to be such a huge influencer.
Correct.
But at the same time, what is it going to take away from us? Is it going to take away the way we interact as human beings? Is it going to take away the way we connect as humans? Is it going to take away everything that we think we require as humanity, right? The people touch. If everything is going to go remote, if everything is going to be driven by technology, then what is happening to humanity and everything that humans bring to our society, to our workplaces and beyond. So I think these are the three things.
Amazing. And on that note, Tina, and your three amazing lessons, first one you said was that always think of what am I doing in my individual capacity when it comes to DEI. Second, you said was bring in change and inclusion as a mindset. I think that's so important. And the third one you said, which is so important, is learn about the shifts in technology with, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and so many other types of new things coming. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for talking to me about diversity, equity, inclusion. Thank you for giving me such amazing examples of how DEI is becoming so critical in our corporate world, in society, and government. Thank you for speaking to me. Good luck to Diversity Simplified as your new venture, and all the very best.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashutosh. And I hope, we get opportunities to meet and connect again.
I hope so. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.